However high the bar was for the Strange New Worlds crossover, it just got bumped up about 10 feet. Hello, geeks, freaks, and all those unique. This is Emcee Frodis. We're talking about episode 6 of season 3, Star Trek Lower Decks. Hear all, trust nothing. Let's not bury the lead. This is the Deep Space Nine crossover. When we first saw Deep Space Nine in the trailers for this season, I didn't think we were getting this. I thought we were going to get a cold open where maybe we saw Deep Space Nine, maybe we'd see the promenade, but as soon as Kira stepped into ops, I knew we were in for a very special episode. This episode has Captain Freeman negotiating with the Karema, aliens from the Gamma Quadrant, in an effort to foster peace in the aftermath of the Dominion War. Tendi has to deal with a pirate-obsessed Orion security officer, Bold Boimler tries his hand at Dabo, and Mariner gets to know Jennifer's friends. This episode could have very well rested on its laurels by just throwing in references to Deep Space Nine, and there would have been a bunch of fans who would have been happy with that. Honestly, me included. When it comes to Deep Space Nine, seeing it in animation, I basically become like Rutherford. Look, it's Ops! Look, it's Quarks! Warren's still there! But in the long run, that would have been very hollow. It wouldn't have been satisfying for a half hour. And the writers knew that. This episode isn't fueled by remember berries. Yes, it has callbacks, but they feel organic to the story. I think the proof that it works comes from when you take the Deep Space Nine elements out of it. I think a majority of the story still works without it. Shax's fighting with a member of his old resistance cell over who owes who. I think it could have worked without it being Kira. It works better as Kira, because this is a character we're familiar with and love, but it still would have been a solid storyline. Tendi and Mariner's plots could have completely been separated from Deep Space Nine. They just have happened to have taken place on Deep Space Nine. Even Boimler playing Dabo and winning could have taken place not on Deep Space Nine. Since we know there are 22 Quarks franchises out across the galaxy, it could have happened at any of them. The only plot that absolutely needed to be on Deep Space Nine was Quark messing things up with the Karema. There's no character that would have worked in that situation. And that's fine. That makes it a good reason for him to be there. He's so intricately tied to the plot. Deep Space Nine enhances everything that happens in this episode. But it's not entirely dependent on nostalgia bait. And that's the way these legacy crossovers are going to have to work. Nana Visitor and Armin Shimmerman do such a fantastic job stepping back into these roles that they haven't played in decades. You hear them and it's Kira and Quark. While Shimmerman has done a good deal of voice acting, I wouldn't say Visitor has done a lot. So that she's able to match up against these seasoned voice actors in the main cast shows how good she is. I would gladly see either of these characters appear again. Lower Decks gives us a fantastic opportunity to revisit stories that we thought were finished years ago. One thing I never really thought about before is how soon after the Dominion War Lower Decks takes place. It's only 5 years after. It's still incredibly fresh for Starfleet, which is something I would like to explore more in the future. This episode, along with We'll Always Have Tom Paris, really puts Lower Decks in a specific place. We can weave these legacy characters in without having to be stymied by the fact that nearly 25 years has passed in our world. We can have these legacy characters appear as they did back in the day. But outside of the Deep Space Nine of it all, we have a very strong story with our characters. Rutherford is very much a minor character, serving as an accessory in Tendi's plot, but considering how much things focused on him last week, I don't think this is a problem. We also have so much from everyone else that someone had to fall to the wayside. I would say that Lower Decks usually does an A-B story structure, but this episode fell more into an A-B-C-D, and all of them were very well done. Freeman's stories with the Karema, Kira, and Quark, and that's the glue holding everything else together. Tendi and Mariner provide the heart, the deep character development. Meanwhile, Boimler's story isn't a huge driving force of the plot, but it continues with his character arc of the season. I've talked a lot this season about Bold Boimler, and I really like how they're not dropping it. While Lower Decks stays episodic, we do have these touchstones where the characters aren't just doing a hard reset at the end of each episode. We're having growth. It would have been very easy to have Boimler keep doubling his bet in Dabo, and then having him lose it all, but instead he gets a win. And it's done in such a charming way, because we find out how little it all meant to him, because Starfleet doesn't have money. So the Ferengi can try to cheat him by turning all of his winnings into money that can only be used at Quarks. But Boimler's only doing it for the experience, and from now on, whenever he goes to a Quarks, he's drinking essentially for free. But the important plot lays with our ladies, Mariner and Tendi. We've seen Tendi struggle with her Orion heritage before, and this is the first time we've really seen her confronted with it. We got a small taste of it in We'll Always Have Tom's Paris, when she had to go back to her former identity of Mistress of the Winter Constellation, and of course there is always her dressing down of Mariner in The Rise of Vindicta. But I feel this is the first time we really get to see the meaty details. Mesk is like an Orion version of Worf. He is an alien raised by humans who conforms to the unrealistic version of his ancestral culture. If you compare Worf to the other Klingons we see in Starfleet, he is very different from them. This is because he wasn't actually raised within the culture, but instead read about it in books, making him much more traditional as a Klingon warrior. A version of the Klingon warrior from before the Klingon War. Mesk is different in his education, coming from much sketchier places, what sounds like the feature version of Harlequin novels. It makes sense that this should be all that's available within the Federation, as there has been no time in history that Orions and humans have really gotten along. For as volatile as a relationship as Klingons and humans have, they have maintained alliances at times, but Orions have mostly been limited to broad stereotypes, one that is none too flattering. Honestly, I'm surprised Mesk didn't treat Tendi much more sexually, considering how Orion females are portrayed. But I think this is good for Tendi to be able to be honest about her upbringing. Not only is she incredibly good at pirating, she seems to enjoy it. And she shouldn't have to hide that part of herself. I'm not saying she has to become the Mistress of the Winter Constellation again, but she shouldn't be afraid to show off her intimidating skills in situations where it calls for it. And let's face it, situations like that are called for in Starfleet somewhat. Mariner's plot is like nothing we've seen from her, and I'm so glad Jennifer is here. I've been wondering when we were going to see her. This is a much more intimate, emotional version of Mariner to the one we usually get to see, and it's a very relatable story trying to fit in with your significant other's friends. Now, I can't say I really support Jennifer not giving Mariner a heads up as to what the night was going to be like, or what Jennifer wanted from her. This seems to be a bit emotionally manipulative to me, but in this episode, you were really able to tell how Jennifer and Beckett have begun to care for one another, and it feels like a solid relationship. This was the first episode of this season where it felt like Mariner really gets a win for herself. This episode was just incredible. It is an instant classic for the series. I think it took Lower Decks a few episodes to really get into the swing of Season 3, but I would say that the last 4 have been incredibly solid, up with some of the best, and this one is absolutely no exception. It is just a fun ride with a good plot and a wonderful use of elements from one of my favorite older Star Trek series. So comment down below with your thoughts on Lower Decks. Here I'll trust nothing. If you like my videos, subscribe to my channel. I'm very close on my next subscription goal of 200 subscribers, and I would love to pass it. I do videos about Star Trek, Star Wars, and lots of other geeky things. Now that it's spooky month, I'm going to be starting my Halloween celebration on the channel. If you want to support me, please visit my Patreon. You can also buy me a coffee, or you can go to my Redbubble and TeePublic and buy my geeky graphic designs. You can find me on all of those platforms as Emcee Frodis. On Patreon, subscribers can also get exclusive early access to my Star Trek 2009 rewrite. So until next time, live long and may the Force be with you.